Picture this. A woman walks into the command room of a federal immigration detention center. She is calm, she is armed, and before the commanding officer can say a word, she strips him of every shred of authority he thought he had. Not with a bullet, but with something far more precise, with language, with presence, with the specific, humiliating knowledge that she knows exactly who he is, and he never accounted for her. That scene takes maybe 3 minutes of screen time. It opens a nearly 3-hour film, and it tells you everything you need to know about what Paul Thomas Anderson is actually doing in one battle after another, which is not making an action film, not making a political thriller, not making a statement either. He's making a film about who gets to be the subject of history and who gets written out of it. One Battle After Another arrived in theaters on September 26, 2025. And if you have been anywhere near film Twitter or a functioning pair of ears, you know it hit like a freight train. 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, Best Picture winner at the BAFTAs, 13 Academy Award nominations. This is not a film that snuck up on anyone, but its reputation as a crowd pleaser might have. Because PTA making a crowd pleaser is not something the universe prepared us for. Here's what the film actually is at its most basic. Bob Ferguson, played by DiCaprio, who seems genuinely liberated by the role, is a former revolutionary and now a stoned, paranoid single father living off the grid in a California community called Backton Cross. His nemesis, a psychotic military colonel named Lockjaw, played by Sean Penn in what might be the most purely unhinged villain performance since Anton Chigurh, resurfaces with one mission: erase any evidence of the mistake he made 16 years ago, including potentially the teenage daughter he doesn't want to claim. And Willa Ferguson, played by Jessie Infiniti in her film debut, is that daughter, smart, self-reliant, and entirely too perceptive for the adults around her. The film is loosely adapted from Thomas Pynchon's 1990 novel Vineland, which Anderson has been trying to crack since the early 2000s. He eventually stopped trying to faithfully adapt it and started asking a different question. What if he took Pynchon's father-daughter dynamic and dropped it into a story he actually needed to tell right now? The result is a film that feels both deeply personal and urgently political, which is a combination of almost nobody in Hollywood can pull off anymore. The character psychology here is dense. The narrative breakdown is sprawling, and somehow the whole thing moves like a sports car. The film opens with a 40-minute prologue, and Paul Thomas Anderson doesn't waste a frame of it. We meet Pat Rocketman Colhan, that's DiCaprio before the 16-year time jump, as a committed, if occasionally hapless, member of the French 75. This is a guerrilla collective operating along the US-Mexico border, liberating detention centers, robbing banks, and generally raising hell against a government that has decided authoritarianism is good governance. The prologue moves at a pace, as one critic has put it, feels like 5 minutes instead of 40. It's exhilarating. And then we cut to 16 years later, and Pat Cullen is gone. In his place is Bob Ferguson, sitting in his kitchen, stoned, watching the Battle of Algiers on VHS, a film about a colonial resistance that ultimately failed, while his teenage daughter quietly keeps the household functional. The emotional storytelling in that image alone is doing the work of 10 dialogue scenes. Because here's what Paul Thomas Anderson understands about identity in a way that most political films don't. The things you fought for don't stay the same as you age into them. The revolution Bob believed in is now something he watches on a TV screen, like a memory of someone he used to be. His daughter has no framework for who he was. She only knows who he is now. And who he is now is a man who has confused paranoia for vigilance and inertia for peace. One of the most quietly devastating choices the film makes is in how DiCaprio plays Bob post time jump. He doesn't play him as broken, he plays him as settled, which is somehow worse. There's a kind of a person who survives something enormous and then constructs a small life that precisely fits the shape of their survival, and they call it contentment. Bob has built a fortress out of cannabis and routine, and his daughter's uncomplaining competence. And he has mistaken the fortress for a home. That's the character psychology at the heart of this film. Not who Bob was, but who he allowed himself to become when no one was watching. There's a scene in this film, quiet, almost parenthetical, almost throwaway in the middle of all the action, where Bob argues with Willa's history teacher. He's wrong, by the way. He's the dad who shows up stoned to school, radiating paranoia, absolutely convinced that the curriculum is propaganda. And he's not entirely wrong about that. The film grants him that much. But he's also clearly, almost tragically, more concerned with being Willa's revolutionary co-conspirator than with being her father. The father-daughter dynamic here is their emotional architecture of the entire film, and Paul Thomas Anderson is smart enough to complicate it in both directions. Because the other parent is Perfidia Beverly Hills, played by Tiana Taylor, and Perfidia is absent, intentionally absent, gone into the machinery of the same revolutionary cause that Bob has quietly abandoned. Willa is being raised in the shadow of two versions of the same commitment, one who stayed, one who fled, and she is the result of both decisions. What the film ultimately says about this is not comfortable. It doesn't tell you which parent made the right call. It doesn't redeem Bob or condemn Perfidia. It watches what happens to the child, which is the only honest thing to do. And if that leaves you unsettled, good. It should. Now the Christmas Adventures Club. I need you to hear that name and understand. This is a secret society of white supremacists who greet each other with, and I'm not making this up, Heil Saint Nick. This is where Paul Thomas Anderson is doing something genuinely difficult and where the visual metaphor of the film gets its sharpest edge. Colonel Lockjaw, doing something between a haunted house villain and a bureaucratic sociopath, spends most of the second act trying to gain membership to this club. His entire paramilitary operation, his obsessive pursuit of Bob and Willa, his particular brand of xenophobic state violence, all of it is filtered through the lens of a man who desperately wants to sit at the cool kids' table. The satire is vicious. These are not imposing ideologues. They are petty, ridiculous, utterly mundane in their evil. And that, the film argues, is exactly the point. The cinematography breakdown of the choice is just as deliberate. Shot on VistaVision, a widescreen format that hasn't been widely used since the 1960s. The film gives California an almost epic grandeur. And then it fills that grandeur with small, venal men doing small, venal things on a very large canvas. The landscape dwarfs them. The history they think they're making is barely a footnote to the geography they're standing in. Anderson completed this film before the current administration took office, and yet, as critic Owen Gleiberman noted in Variety, it feels designed to sit just ahead of the curve of where we are, which is either prescience or tragedy, depending on your mood. What the film refuses to do is what lesser political cinema does constantly. It refuses to make the authoritarians interesting. Lockjaw is compelling because Penn is Penn, but the cause Lockjaw serves rendered absurd, deliberately and relentlessly, until you can't decide whether to laugh or to recognize it. Here's where I have to be honest with you, because good analysis requires it. One battle after another does not land for everyone, and the criticisms aren't unfair. The film's tonal balance is genuinely volatile. Paul Thomas Anderson is simultaneously trying to make a slapstick black comedy, a dad failure character study, a political thriller, and a heartfelt father-daughter drama. And at times, these gears grind against each other audibly. The bathrobe scene where Bob runs around helplessly while everything collapses is very funny, but it sits directly adjacent to scenes of real graphic violence and ideological weight, and the whiplash occasionally loses the room. There's also a serious ongoing conversation about Perfidia Beverly Hills that the film doesn't fully answer. Tiana Taylor is extraordinary in the role, but the role itself is complicated. She is at various points desired and violated by two white men, used as a plot catalyst more than a subject, and sexualized in ways that some critics and audience members found troubling given the character's revolutionary significance. The other failure of reception, and I would call it that, is the audience who arrives expecting there will be blood and finds something closer to Boogie Nights in a flake jacket. Not everyone is ready for Paul Thomas Anderson in full screwball mode. Here's what one battle after another ultimately leaves you with. Not answers, not a roadmap for resistance, not even a clear verdict on whether the battles Bob and Perfidia and the rest of the French 75 fought were worth the cost. What it leaves you with is Willa. Willa, who inherited a world made by people who were trying to unmake it, who is smarter than most of the adults in her life and has the grace not to say so too often, who drives in a car chase that, purely on technical grounds, is one of the iconic film scenes of 2025, down a California hillside being persuaded by men with state authority and bad intentions, and who handles it with the focused, slightly furious competence of someone who was always going to have to handle things herself. In that car chase scene, shot wide in Vista Vision, each angle assembled from multiple perspectives by editor Andy Jurgensen, with precision of someone who is genuinely afraid the thing will explode before they are done. You feel the film's thesis become physical. The next generation picks up the flag. That's what it leaves you with. Not triumph, not resolution. The durable, ordinary miracle of someone who was prepared. One of the best films of 2025 asks you to hoard that without simplifying it. And I think that's worth 3 years of your life. Thank you so much for watching.